Good afternoon, everyone, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Building Partnerships in Legal Scholarship, Law Libraries, and the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship. Can everyone hear me okay? Is this loud enough? Okay. And I am delighted to introduce our panelists today. Starting from your right, my left, Dana Nakshu, a librarian and lecturer in law at the Columbia Law School Library. Larry Abraham, who is the head of instructional services at the Fordham University Law School Library. And Rebecca Kennison, who is the director of the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship at Columbia University. Thank you.
Trying to understand our problems in terms of building partnerships in legal scholarship. And it all started not so long ago, maybe in the 90s, when the web became a prevalent, powerful partner, a disruptive partner in more ways than one in terms of its influence over legal scholarship. And this is a quote that Rebecca brought to my attention, and I think it's very useful to keep in mind because indeed, despite the fact that legal scholarship is an enterprise that is very much conservative, and its rules of citation are extremely conservative, and they try to be limited to whatever is in print, we cannot ignore the fact that more and more resources are available online. And our researchers are going to incorporate those fickle online sources. And how that is going to affect us is something that we are going to partially address today. So challenges and opportunities for legal scholarship. From Fordham Law Library, Larry is going to talk to us about supporting interdisciplinary research needs and maybe the problems raised by that aspect. And here, from the Columbia angle, we are going to talk about how we can support legal scholarship production. And I'm going to talk about the pre-publishing level, and we'll give you a little bit of insight of the conundrums attached to that process. And then Rebecca is going to illuminate everybody with what's going on at the publishing level. So I'm going to let Larry talk about the Fordham experience and the impact of interdisciplinarity.
Thank you very much, Donna. First of all, I'd like to say what a pleasure it is to be back at Columbia, where I spent many happy and occasionally a few productive hours as an undergraduate and law student, and where I was inspired to become a librarian. So if there are any Columbia librarians in the audience, thank you. I'm here to talk about interdisciplinary scholarship in law schools from a librarian's perspective. And I guess the first thing that has to be said is that to a great extent, it's really not what, say, 25 years ago, law schools and law librarians had signed on for. The hallmark of legal scholarship up until fairly recently was people who were learned in the law, and almost exclusively in the law, attempting to figure out what the law stood for, what it meant, and that sort of thing. However, in law, as in many other scholarly disciplines, the trend is very much towards interdisciplinarity, to the extent that increasingly faculty hiring in law schools is not just among people who possess law degrees, but people who also possess PhDs and are interested in sort of raising among other academics the level of academic seriousness of legal scholarship. Since to a first approximation, PhDs in law don't really exist, there are SJDs, but those aren't considered sort of on the same level as PhDs by the people who hold the PhDs. We sort of end up in a situation where we have to hire people where we want to hire people, we being the law schools in general, not the libraries, where we want to hire people who have these scholarly interests developed in PhD programs. And that puts a strain on the law school librarian, because the law school librarian most likely is a dual degree librarian, has been trained in law and in librarianship, but because of the increasing interdisciplinarity of legal scholarship, is now called on not just to have 2 areas of expertise, but even more. So how have we dealt with that? What have we done about that? It occurs to me now that looking at my slide, I've really sort of put things backwards. I ought to have put the liaison program first. Let me spend about 15, 20 seconds on the liaison program. It's fairly common in law schools that every member of the faculty is assigned an individual librarian. At Fordham, it's not just reference librarians, it's every MLS holder in the building, because we just need everybody we can get. Is assigned a librarian who's primarily responsible for being that person's point of contact for anything from getting material on reserve to the sort of thing we're talking about here, intense research experiences. And the way we account for interdisciplinarity in the liaison program is to attempt to match the librarians because of previous work experience, previous academic experience, or just sort of luck to the interdisciplinary academic interests of their liaison faculty. We try to do that through grouping. That's very popular for us. You know, one of my colleagues has a master's in economics, so we try to give her and experience, pardon me, also as a corporate lawyer. So we try to give her all of the corporate faculty, which sort of makes sense from a straight law sense. You know, she really understands the securities laws, and somebody who had worked as a family law practitioner wouldn't. But also, she really has a keen understanding of economics and the economics literature and that sort of thing, so that she can support that kind of interdisciplinary scholarship. It leads, of course, which of course leads to the problem: what do we do when someone has an interdisciplinary interest in which none of us has any specialty, and then basically we punt and hope for the best? The other thing that's very interesting in what we're doing not exactly interdisciplinarily, but similar to it, is we've created an increased emphasis on empirical research in law. To a great extent, the tradition in legal scholarship is sort of great theorizing about what the law ought to mean and how it ought to work, and making normative claims that can't possibly be tested. And again, over the last 25 years, that's evolved to the extent where people wish to prove empirically what they're doing. So we have created an empirical specialist position within the library. And as we were hiring for that position, we sort of really thought carefully about whether we wanted a person who was an empiricist first and a librarian second, a person who was a librarian first and an empiricist second, or a person who was a librarian first and last and had some understanding of empiricism. And the conclusion we came to was that, you know, it was that whatever partnerships we created, we sort of had to create among ourselves, because the needs of our library and the size of our staff were such that we literally couldn't afford to have somebody who was purely focused on empirics and unable to serve as a traditional reference librarian. So we sort of squared the circle, and instead of creating a partnership, we sort of created the skills among ourselves. The other way we engage in partnership is, and it's sort of partnership, but it's more like the partner. I don't know exactly how to describe the partnership now that I think about it, but has to do with the first thing that I mentioned on my slide over here, which is the means by which we acquire or choose not to acquire materials that support interdisciplinary scholarship. The Fordham approach to acquisitions is somewhat unusual. We don't have subject specialists. I mean, yeah, you could make the reasonable argument that we're all legal librarians and therefore we're all subject specialists, but we don't even have subspecialties. It's not like somebody is doing everything with, somebody's doing all of the family law selection and somebody's doing all of the selection of law for the Southern Hemisphere, that sort of thing. We all do it together. Everybody has their own expertise, but we all do it together. We get together every 2 or 3 weeks, pretty much all of the professional librarians in the library, and we say, okay, these are the books we're buying this week, or these are the cereals we're getting rid of, or whatever it is we happen to be doing that week. And one of the questions that always comes up in the acquisition of materials that aren't strictly law has to do with what we think, with our best guess as to what the university libraries are going to do. Because one of the ways in which we manage interdisciplinary scholarship and participation is to rely to a great extent on the university libraries to provide those things that it's economically inefficient for us to provide ourselves, both economically inefficient in the sense that they would charge us just as much as they're going to charge the university libraries, even though they serve a much larger community, and economically inefficient in the sense that we get access to everything they have. That set of considerations, though, opens us up, and mostly willingly, to sort of what we see as the flip side of the equation, which is that then, just as much as legal scholars are interested in doing law and scholars of other disciplines are interested in doing and law. And by relying on those good folks, we sort of end up in a situation, in which we're getting a lot of incoming traffic as well as providing our outgoing traffic. And we manage that relationship mostly informally, but it seems to work. Anyway, muddling through would probably be an excessively reductive way to put it. But basically what we're doing is figuring out a way by cooperating as librarians with other librarians to get everybody everything they need. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Larry. And what I think Larry was able to let us see is how complex legal scholarship is. It's not just going to a statute, a copyright statute, for example, and describe how it was passed and its implications and whatever case law came up out of it. So everything now is getting more and more complex and more difficult to support. So I'm going to talk about the peculiarities of legal scholarship, not from its content point of view, which I let Larry give you a taste of it, but from its practical aspect. So most of you have published in your life in some format or not, at a minimum on the web, on your blog. But if you do it professionally, there is an editor whose job is to edit your work. You submit your work, that editor is going to work with it, and after that it's going to be published by a professional publisher, and Rebecca knows the ins and outs of that process much more than I do, and I don't want to make up anything. But when we talk about legal scholarship, we talk about student-edited journals. And what's very interesting, for a faculty member, a law faculty member, in order to obtain tenure, that faculty member has to publish in those student-edited journals. Not books. They don't count for tenure. But journals are journal articles. From my point of view, I'm very disturbed by that because there is a hierarchy of journals. And guess who is considered to be at the top? Journals from very conservative law schools, which happen to be ranked as number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right? The ranking just came up. So you can go and see it. Kenny is smiling. Yale is number 1. We are number 4 at Columbia Law School. And our students are going to publish the work of their professors. And we are going to perpetuate the scholarship that comes from these top tiered schools. And just to give you an idea of how things work with legal scholarship, this is a list of all the journals out there. There are maybe about 1,000. We usually include Canada as our 51st state. And as you see, student-edited, peer-edited, and refereed. And you would be amazed that peer-edited are a third, maybe, of all the journals contained here. So most of them are student edited. This is just a ranking alphabetically organized, but we can play around and see what's going on. I'm going back to my problems. In addition to the fact that, so student-edited journals are the repositories of legal scholarship, there is an additional problem that I'm going to talk about, the impact of annual turnaround of editorial boards. Because students are part of these editorial boards just for a limited amount of time. So let's say that you have an editor who is excellent, learned how to edit your piece, but within a year that student is gone. So you have a new set of students who have to familiarize themselves with the rules of editing, and many of those rules are quite style related, and those rules are published in something that we call the Blue Book because it has a blue cover, and so forth. So I don't know if you can get a sense of the tension that's there between content and the practicality of publications, of publishing journals. So here comes Rebecca as a life savior. From my position as a librarian who has to train these editors in the Blue Book rules of how you cite, they come to the library to understand. I have to give you a little bit more of a background here. If I say that this chair is blue in any publication, that will be sufficient. Or if I say that a chair is good for sitting, that will be sufficient, you will accept my statement. Not when it comes to legal scholarship. I have to footnote that statement. I have to hope that Kenny has published an article about the value of that chair, and I can footnote that article that gives credence and value to my statement. So what's going on? The footnotes make an article valuable. And those students who are the editors on those editorial boards come to the librarian and ask us for help in order to identify those obscure sources that are going to give credence to the article they chose to publish in their journal. And we have to train those students year in and year out because there is no way around it. In addition to that, they are going to ask the library and the librarian to borrow books or borrow articles, and we help them create a shelf collection. So we have printouts or the physical book, and we put them on a shelf, which seems to me a bit Luddite when we can scan the article or scan the page and create those digital shelf collections. And that's part of the pre-publication process I'm talking about, and my collaboration with the CDRS in terms of how they support our pre-publication process. Now, there are many impediments, in addition to what I told you, impediments that are related to the nature of legal scholarship. There are also administrative impediments because who is going to help these journals? The library, the CDRS, the law school, the journal itself, which is incorporated quite often. And my position, since I've been here, has been that the library should become a partner and support the publication of journals. And we have the expertise, and this is our role. We have to reinvent our role in terms of supporting legal scholarship. And this is one of the roles that no one wants to take. It's our to grab. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work. So from my position of a librarian who wants to support the publication of these journals, comes this idea of a digital shelf collection and my begging and the generous response I received from Rebecca and the CDRS. Yes, here we have this product called Alfresco, a platform that allows you to upload whatever documents you want and create your own protected library of sources. To give you another sense, you saw that list of hundreds of journals. Many of them are specialized, as Larry mentioned, that you would have a scholarship in family law or corporate law or law and economics. There are journals that mirror those types of research interests. And imagine if you publish something in a specialized journal, you tend to use the same resources to support your statement. If I'm interested in the chair scholarship, I'm going to refer to Kenny's article about that chair, whether I want to publish an article today or tomorrow or and so forth. So the value of having a digital collection of all those resources is that libraries don't have to spend that much money on interlibrary loan requests because everything is protected by password. Alfresco offers that option, so we won't have to run into any copyright problems, whatsoever. So I'm going to try to show you. Let's see if it works. And after that, I'm going to let Rebecca explain to you more about what CDRS is. We do have, yes. It's whether we have or not internet connection, and we do. So it's very easy. You're going to log in. And you're going to find your sites, search for sites, and it's very easy to find. Look, I'm going to do just an L, for example, anything. And they're going to tell me that I'm involved in all these journals. And I'm going to click on the Columbia Journal of Law and Race. Rebecca is going to talk more about the CDRS support of the publication aspect. This is the pre-publication, the kitchen work. Before you serve the meal, you go and prepare the meal. This is what I'm showing you. So you can have a document library where you can upload everything that you need in order to verify the statements that an author makes in an article. You can have a calendar, and you can give assignments to your editorial board and put those assignments there. You can have what I like, links, for example, to whatever sites you are going to use in order to check Pegasus, see if the library has a site and has a source that you are interested in. Discussion, the members, you can invite everybody to become a member. A wiki where you can post whatever rules you have, and of course a blog, and you are going to say whatever you want to say. Everything is here. The only problem that people raise about Alfresco, and this may be something, Alfresco is not on a cloud. So Alfresco is on Columbia server, which is good. It is good because it's safe, it's protected, it's going to be here forever. What's bad about it from the student's point of view is that they cannot work on a document and have real-time exchanges. At the same time, I open a document that's here, Larry can open it and make changes, and Rebecca make changes in the same way that Dropbox works, if you are familiar with that platform. So this may be something I suspect that we can work around, and we can improve the product, but the benefit that Alfresco gives you is just amazing. So I'm going to let Rebecca explain to us how CDRS supports the publishing aspect when the meal is being served. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna and Larry. So I think you're getting a bit of a flavor for, if you didn't know legal scholarship before and how it worked, that it's quite different from the way that we normally have thought of the scholarly communication system, that you maybe work with collaborators, you write a paper, you submit it to a journal, it goes through the peer review process, it eventually sees the light of day out at the other end. So it's been fascinating for me because I know nothing about, or didn't know really anything about how legal scholarship was published. And I mean, who hasn't heard of, Harvard Law Review or something? Of course we all have. That this is published by and edited by students. You might have paid attention to that, particularly when Obama was famously the editor of Columbia. Was it Columbia? No, Harvard. Harvard. See, I don't even. That's right. I'm just trying to stir up trouble by mentioning Obama and Columbia in the same. That's right. I'm very delighted he's going to Barnard. Just going to say, Fonny's from Barnard. So one of the things that when I was starting at the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship, which is within the libraries here at Columbia, I like to say I'm not a librarian, but I play one at conferences, so thank you all for having me here, is one of the many things that we do at Cedars is support journal publishing. And one of the first areas that we got into, in part because Kenny's like the fourth member of our panel here. One of the things that Kenny did was he actually introduced us to people over at the law school who were very interested in having some of that support from a group that could provide that coherence that Donna was talking about. Is normally there's a yearly churn. The editors are coming in. They're very interested in doing the editing, but they don't really know anything about publishing or editing or really anything in the process. And so Donna takes them and the other members of the law school library staff really help them to work through that whole bit at the beginning. You know, what are you doing? How are you doing it? And then we, at the back end, help to provide that coherence, that cohesion of last year's editors. What did they sign? What agreements did they sign with Hein Online or whatever? What did they do in the past? What would you like to do in the future this year with your journal while you have it for 1 year? And so I think we do a very good a team approach, which is why we thought it would be interesting to talk about what we're doing. So these are the 14. There are 14 law reviews here at Columbia. These are the 14 that some you may have heard of, some you may not have heard of, and I think probably there's a new law review that starts every year or so. I think that's fair to say. So the ones that we're hosting ourselves, so the ones that we work very closely with the editors and they're on our platform being hosted by the Center for Digital Research and Scholarship at Columbia, are the ones that are just highlighted here. And we have a variety of levels that we host at. So there are 7 of the 14 that we have. One of those is under discussion, but the rest of those we're hosting those. So the extended level, and I gave you guys a handout, and the video people don't get a handout, but I gave you a handout so that would break down for you what these various levels are. But an extended level is really very high level. We support everything that goes on at the business law review. So we did the design work. We host their text. We help them with really everything soup to nuts that they want to do. The basic level, which is where most people are, we set up a website for them, and we help them to work within that system, give them training. For the most part, we're using WordPress blogs to help them out. And then simple and design, that's a design function there. So a variety of those. This kind of just breaks down what those levels are that they get to come when an editor comes. And again, this is a year-by-year process. So a new editor comes in, it's as if we're starting all over again with a new journal. So they don't know anything about what their predecessors did. They don't know anything about running a journal. They don't know anything about, they don't like the design that the previous editors chose. They want to do something completely different. They have historically been in print, and now they've finally decided that they want to enter the 21st century. To be honest, we don't have very many of those still, although that was the original goal, was that we would help everybody to get online. So by online, they now mean they put their abstracts up, and here you can buy the print copy. I'm sure Donna and Larry could both talk more about that, but we do try very much to encourage those people who come on board with us to think very differently about what 21st century publication looks like. And so again, we have a conversation with the editors. They tell us what they want, they tell us what they envision, and then we decide which level of service to provide. We are not a cost recovery service, and so consequently, we give them a very reasonable, even for those things that say fee, we give them a very reasonable rate to play around with. And sometimes they go away and say, wow, that's too much, and you know, I have a friend who will do web design for $100 for me. And so that's fine if they want to do that. We will also just host the journals for them, and they can bring their own designers in to do the work as well. So very, very flexible in terms of what we will provide for them. But again, the most important thing is, and the reason that we would love to have all 14 journals come on board, is that coherence and cohesion year after year after year, where they don't have to worry about, you know, who registered their domain with whom and in what name, and 5 years from now they lose their domain because somebody's left Columbia, used their Columbia ID as their contact information, and so on. So, and we do this beyond the law journals, but the law journals as a collection and collective are the largest number of journals that we have. We're hosting about 20 journals, of which 7 right now are law journals. So, that said, you know, beyond the hosting of journals themselves, Donna's already talked to you about Alfresco. You can see the Alfresco members here, but there are 10 journals listed here. Again, I told you it's 14. So we touch 10 of the 14, which is pretty excellent, you know, number of touches that we have on here. And some of them we're hosting, some of them are just using Alfresco. Several of them are appearing in Academic Commons, which is our institutional repository, and they are depositing once a year. So we might not be hosting them, but they're giving us their content to keep and preserve and show. And so, and again, it really, really depends on what the editors want, and we work very actively with our partners at the, you know, in the library in particular to really get people more and more to come on board, and we've had very good success with that. So, so we've gone kind of from the big picture of you know, the whole way that scholarship works, and drilled down to, you know, how are you going to get that article online out of Alfresco and up. So I think that's it. How do we do, Vaughn?
So I guess we can open it up to questions now. We do have some time if anyone has questions.
How have you seen CDRS assist in the interdisciplinary process of the pre-publication? Are you seeing some, because of your collaboration with journals, not just in the law school, but possibly in the other areas, finding ways to put those two together because of the shared process?
A lot of the process that we do within our center is not naturally interdisciplinary, shall we say, but the law journals in particular are increasingly interdisciplinary, and so we have the Journal of Race and Law, for example, and it used to be that's a reformulated journal that used to be the National Black Law Review Journal, something. I can't remember what's Review Journal, which is now being hosted by another group because the editors within that journal wanted to expand it well beyond just national black and make it much more about race and law around the world, make it much more interdisciplinary, bring in a variety of voices there. I think that's a a really good example of how the editors, as they're coming in, are really thinking differently about how to do that work. Now, what makes that kind of interesting from the point of view of what Donna did, and maybe she can talk a bit about that too, is that those citations that right now are individually assigned to a journal, those shelves that are now, digital shelves, sharing across that and allowing for people who might be within one journal to take a look at what an editor in another journal has done. That's a total possibility within the framework that we've worked with Donna to set up. So.
Yes, if I may add, that's the beauty of Alfresco, because you can invite someone else from another department to view your documents. So indeed, that was also the attraction, the major attraction of Alfresco. You're going to say that Google Documents can do that. The major impediment of Google Documents is its limited space, while Alfresco has no limitation, and also you don't have to worry about whose contact information is down and so forth. So the continuity. And in terms of interdisciplinarity, yes, you can be a scientist and have access to Alfresco, and you are going to be invited by the administrator of the site. And as I said, unlike Google Docs, you can post your video or whatever resource you are going to use, because Alfresco has the resources to help you.
So is this limited to Columbia University faculty and students, or can you invite,
We can invite
experts?
you, we can invite anybody, yes. That's the beauty of it, and I just spoke to Rebecca about it. What would happen if someone who opened a site here would leave and go to another academic institution, and Rebecca said that that's the purpose of CEDARS, to support.
So there are some limitations at Columbia, as well as I'm sure most other places, in terms of collaboration. Alfresco is one of several collaboration systems that CEDARS hosts for faculty and staff and grad students to be able to do collaboration outside, increasingly in a global environment. Almost everybody is outside of Columbia. In fact, the medical campus is somewhat considered outside of Columbia, even in terms of the way that structures and being able to share files. So we run a couple of systems. One is Wiki Scholars, which is also open to, you have to be at Columbia in order to set up the account, but after that, as an administrator, you can invite anybody that you want to. The same thing is true of Alfresco. The difference between those is Wiki Scholars is very much of a wiki solution, and Alfresco is very much of a document management system. So that's one reason that you can't just share to write together, because the purpose of Alfresco is version control. So Donna's writing, and I can't override what she's doing. I can't make changes. She checks it out. She writes it. She checks it back in. I check it out. I write some more. I check it in. Larry checks it out, and so on. So it's a very strict version control system. It's used by big enterprise groups for the most part in order to really do some document management. It also has the ability, though, and this is where it's used quite often by researchers who want to share collections of research that they're doing. Because it's such a small group that's getting to look at those things, then it's just but much better than sending a PDF to your colleagues or something like that. So we try very hard to help everybody be as global and as interactive with each other as possible.
So how much do law schools collaborate on their journals in general? I mean, from school to school. I mean, does Fordham?
Not at all.
They don't really, do they?
I mean, sorry. That's sort of not a very nuanced answer. In terms of...
But accurate.
But accurate.
Accurate.
The not only do they not really collaborate with each other from school to school, they don't collaborate intra-school either. I mean, it's not quite to the point of view where they sort of sit they're all sort of on the same hallway at Fordham, and it's not quite like they're, sort of sniping at each other from their offices, but sometimes uncomfortably close. But there is a great deal of collaboration because almost invariably the author of the piece isn't from the school that's publishing the piece. The article is proposed by a professor at Fordham, and it's published in the Law Review at Columbia. And exactly how the breakdown of responsibility for some of these more complicated issues works is always difficult to figure out. We try to give the maximum support to our student journal members so that they don't have to sort of rely on the professors and the professors' home institutions. But by contrast, if one of our professors comes in and says, well, the kids from whatever journal can't find the sites for my piece, help me, we do it. So there's a good deal of collaboration on the article production process, but there's not a lot of formal collaboration among journals.
And we skipped over the whole very odd way that reviews of legal scholarship happen. Almost all of them now use a commercially run system called Espresso. Yeah, depending on which side you're looking at there. It's also called Etiquette and whatever, but run out of B Press in California. And basically, if I write, you guys will correct me if I'm wrong here. My understanding
Maybe.
is if I write an article, I can submit it into that system, and I can say, here are the 10 journals that I'd really be interested in publishing this piece in, ranked 1 to 10, and then the editors get notified that here's an article that they should review, and they can review. Somebody can come back, and maybe they're number 6 on my list as the author, and so I can then say, oh, I really wanted to be in the Harvard Law Review, and Columbia accepted me, but I really want to be in Harvard. And so write to the editor and say, hey, are you guys considering my piece? And so on. So it's like anti-collaboration, if I can put it that way. It's very competitive, but it's all within this one system, which makes sense within that system because you're kind of bidding off against each other and trying to up your own ranking within where you want to publish. So so I think is that an accurate?
Absolutely, it's amazing. Yes.
Perfect, bang on.
Yes.
I don't mean to cut the session short, but technically the refreshments session is starting now. So what we could do is, if you want, maybe we could have room for one more question. And then if you wanted to continue the conversation, maybe we can all kind of migrate over to the next room and just informally talk. But if there's another question, we could fit another one in.
It would be lovely if someone had a question, but my ego does not need you to think I'm better than cookies.
Can I ask you a question about?
Yeah.
About Fordham Libraries. Now, I know
Sure.
Fordham Law is at the Lincoln Center location, but the
We
Fordham
are.
campus is in the Bronx. And you had just talked about the acquisition. The way you do acquisitions is kind of different in that you collaborate with your fellow librarians on a weekly basis or something like that,
Yeah,
and
2-3
decide
times a
what
month.
comes and goes. Does this include the Bronx campus?
No,
And
this is purely within the law library itself.
so how about resources for law school students from the Bronx campus?
There are no law school students at the Bronx. Oh, how do we get resources from the Bronx campus to the law school students?
And do you have any input in that if you're,
No.
increasing your intellectual property,
We sort of, as an informal matter, let them know what we're doing, and they, as a sort of informal matter, let us know what they're doing. But relationships between law schools and universities are rarely placid. And I'll leave it at that. If you'd like further detail, we'll talk later. As I always tell my students, when somebody sends you an email asking you an interesting question, the only appropriate response is, I'll call you back.
Well, I won't push you. We are on video. I don't want it to be used against you later.
That's what I'm saying.